Chapter 1. Whispers in the Sand. Imagine a world bathed in relentless sun, a land of towering monuments, secrets buried deep. This was ancient Egypt. Not the Egypt of golden masks and glorious victories, but a place where shadows lurked beneath the veneer of civilization, a place where a single misstep could shatter a life irrevocably. Forget what you know. We're diving into the heart of a system built on power, fear, and the devastating consequences of crossing its invisible lines. Our story begins not with pharaohs and gods, but with the whispers, the hushed tones passed between women in the market, the anxieties etched on their faces, as they navigated a world meticulously controlled by men. For women, life in ancient Egypt, particularly within the noble and priestly classes, was a precarious dance. They held certain rights, yes, they could own property, represent themselves in legal matters, but their standing rested on a fragile foundation, obedience and perceived moral purity. A woman's reputation was her most valuable asset. A single accusation of infidelity could trigger a catastrophic downfall. It wasn't merely a personal failing. It was seen as a direct assault on family honor, lineage, and the very stability of the ruling dynasty. Consider the case of Nefertari, not the great royal wife of Ramesses II, but a lesser-known woman bearing the same name. Nefertari was a handmaiden in the court of Thutmose IV, a young woman of considerable beauty and intelligence, but with a spirit that chafed against the rigid constraints of palace life. She was married to a craftsman, a respected man, but one who spent long hours away from home, working on the intricate carvings that adorned the pharaoh's new temple. The silence in their small house grew thick, a breeding ground for discontent. One sweltering afternoon, while her husband toiled under the desert sun, a messenger arrived at Nefertari's door, an invitation to attend a private gathering at the villa of a wealthy nobleman, Lord Ahamos. Ahamos was known for his lavish parties, gatherings filled with music, wine, and whispered conversations. Nefertari hesitated. Such invitations were not uncommon for women of her standing, but they were fraught with peril. A misinterpreted glance, an overheard remark, could be twisted into something dangerous. Yet curiosity, a longing for something more than the monotonous routine of her days, propelled her forward. She spent hours preparing, carefully applying kohl to her eyes, arranging her hair, and selecting her finest linen gown. As she looked at her reflection in the polished copper mirror, she saw a woman trapped, a woman yearning for a life beyond the confines of her marriage and her social expectations. She knew the risks, but the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. The villa was a haven of opulence. Fountains gurgled in the courtyard, servants glided through the rooms offering delicacies, and musicians played enchanting melodies. Nefertari felt a sense of wonder, a brief escape from the ordinary. She mingled with the other guests, listening to their conversations, observing their elegant movements, and savoring the unfamiliar tastes of imported wines and fruits. Lord Ahamos greeted her warmly, showering her with compliments and offering her a seat beside him. He was a charming man, with a disarming smile and a reputation for generosity. He engaged her in conversation, asking about her life, her interests, and her aspirations. Nefertari felt her drawn to his attention, flattered by his words, and captivated by his worldly knowledge. As the evening progressed and the wine flowed freely, the atmosphere became more intimate. Guests began to pair off, retreating to secluded corners of the garden or disappearing into the dimly lit chambers of the villa. Nefertari felt a growing unease, a sense that she was treading on dangerous ground. She excused herself from Lord Ahmos's company, seeking refuge in the cool darkness of the courtyard. But the escape was short-lived. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man she recognized as Seti, a high-ranking official in the pharaoh's court and a known rival of Lord Ahmos. Seti approached her with a sly smile, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and malice. "Nefertari," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation. "What a surprise to see you here. I trust you are enjoying Lord Hamos's hospitality." Nefertari's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that Seti was not simply making polite conversation. He was testing her, probing for weaknesses, seeking an opportunity to exploit her presence. "Lord Hamos is a gracious host," she replied, carefully choosing her words. "I am merely here to enjoy the music and the company." Seti chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Of course," he said, "but I wouldn't want your husband to misunderstand your intentions. After all, reputation is everything in this life." His words hung in the air, a veiled threat that Nefertari understood all too well. She knew that Seti was aware of her discontent, of her longing for a life beyond her current circumstances, and he was using that knowledge against her. As she stared into his cold, calculating eyes, Nefertari realized that she had made a terrible mistake. She had allowed her curiosity and her desire for something more to lead her into a trap. And now, her life, her reputation, and her future hung in the balance. The echoes of her laughter from earlier in the evening seemed like a cruel jest, a reminder of the innocence she had so carelessly abandoned. The sand shifted beneath her, a tangible reminder of the unforgiving desert that surrounded her, a symbol of the isolation and despair that awaited her if she were to stumble. The whispers grew louder, no longer just the murmur of polite conversation, but the sound of judgment, of accusation, of impending doom. The sun, once a source of life and warmth, now felt like a burning brand, searing her skin, exposing her vulnerability. She was alone, and the game had only just begun. Nefertari's mind raced, searching for a way out of the precarious situation. Seti's presence was a viper in the garden, injecting poison into an already tense atmosphere. She knew he wouldn't simply let her go. He had something to gain from her downfall. Perhaps it was a genuine sense of moral outrage. Perhaps it was a calculated move to undermine Lord Hamos. Or perhaps it was a twisted desire to possess her. Whatever the reason, she knew she had to tread carefully. "I assure you, Seti," she said, forcing a calm tone, "my husband trusts me implicitly. There is nothing here for him to misunderstand." She attempted a light laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension, but it sounded hollow, unconvincing even to her own ears. Seti merely raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Trust is a fragile thing, Nefertari, easily broken by circumstance," and whispered words. He paused, letting his words sink in. "And words, as you know, can be very powerful weapons." He gestured towards the villa, from which music and laughter still echoed, although now it sounded distant and mocking. "This is a dangerous place for a married woman, especially one as admired as you are." He was baiting her, pushing her to react, to reveal her fear. She refused to give him the satisfaction. "I am capable of taking care of myself, Seti," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "I suggest you concern yourself with your own affairs." With that, she turned and walked away, her back straight, her head held high, although inside she was trembling. She needed to escape this place, to return home and pray that Seti would not carry out his threat. She hurried through the villa, past the revelers, past the servants, past the watchful eyes that seemed to follow her every move. She found her way to the outer courtyard, where her chariot awaited. She climbed in and instructed the driver to take her home as quickly as possible. As the chariot rattled through the streets, Nefertari couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that Seti's eyes were still upon her, even in the darkness. She arrived home to find her husband, Amenemhat, already asleep. She slipped into bed beside him, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. He was a good man, a hard-working man, and she had jeopardized their marriage with her foolish vanity. She vowed to never again venture into such dangerous territory. She would dedicate herself to her husband and her home, and pray that Seti would forget about her indiscretion. But her hopes were short-lived. A week later, a summons arrived from the palace. Nefertari was ordered to appear before the high priest and a panel of judges to answer accusations of adultery. Her heart sank. Seti had made good on his threat. The trial was a public spectacle, held in the courtyard of the Temple of Amun. A large crowd gathered, eager to witness the downfall of a woman accused of such a heinous crime. Nefertari stood before the judges, her face pale, her hands trembling. She was surrounded by accusers, by the cold, impassive faces of the men who held her fate in their hands. Seti was there, of course, his eyes glinting with triumph. He presented his case, weaving a web of lies and half-truths, painting Nefertari as a promiscuous woman who had betrayed her husband and dishonored her family. He claimed to have witnessed her engaging in scandalous behavior with Lord Ahmose, providing fabricated details and distorted accounts of the events at the villa. Nefertari vehemently denied the accusations, proclaiming her innocence and pleading with the judges to see through Seti's deceit. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The judges, influenced by Seti's power and swayed by the prevailing social prejudices, were already predisposed to believe the worst. Amenemhat, her husband, stood by her side, his face etched with confusion and pain. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of the accusations, the public humiliation, and the potential consequences were overwhelming. He was torn between his love for his wife and his fear of social ostracism. The trial dragged on for days, with Seti presenting more and more fabricated evidence, and Nefertari desperately trying to defend herself. But the odds were stacked against her. She was a woman, accused of adultery, in a society where women were often seen as property, as objects to be controlled and punished. Finally, the judges reached their verdict. Nefertari was found guilty of adultery. The sentence was harsh: public flogging, followed by exile to a remote desert outpost. The crowd gasped, a mixture of shock, satisfaction, and morbid curiosity. Nefertari's world crumbled around her, her life shattered into a million pieces. As the guards led her away, she caught Amenemhat's eye. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and regret. He wanted to reach out to her, to offer her comfort, but he was paralyzed by fear, by the societal pressure, by the knowledge that any act of support would further jeopardize his own standing. Nefertari knew then that she was truly alone. She had been betrayed by her own desires, manipulated by her enemies, and abandoned by the man she loved. As she was dragged towards the whipping post, she looked up at the unforgiving sun, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. The whispers intensified, a chorus of condemnation, a symphony of shame. Her name, once a symbol of beauty and promise, was now synonymous with disgrace. The sand, once a playground for children, a canvas for artists, had become her execution ground. The weight of accusation, heavier than any stone, had crushed her spirit and sealed her fate. The flogging was brutal, a calculated display of power designed to break Nefertari's body and spirit. The whip, wielded by a merciless guard, sliced through her linen gown, leaving raw welts across her back. Each lash was a searing reminder of her perceived transgression, each strike a painful echo of Seti's vengeful machinations. The crowd roared, a grotesque spectacle of voyeurism and judgment. Nefertari bit her lip, refusing to cry out, determined to maintain a shred of dignity amidst the humiliation. She focused on the horizon, on the distant line where the sand met the sky, trying to detach herself from the agonizing reality. She thought of her childhood, of running barefoot through the fields, of laughing with her friends, of dreaming of a future filled with love and happiness. Those memories, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel taunt, a reminder of all that she had lost. As the flogging reached its climax, Nefertari's vision began to blur. She felt her strength ebbing away, her body teetering on the brink of collapse. Just as she thought she could endure no more, the guard finally stopped. She slumped against the post, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But the ordeal was far from over. After a brief respite, she was dragged to a waiting chariot, ready to begin her journey into exile. The desert outpost, known only as the Scar, was a desolate settlement located on the fringes of civilization, a place of hardship and despair, where unwanted individuals were banished to wither and die. As the chariot lurched forward, Nefertari glanced back at the crowd. Their faces were a blur of hatred and indifference. She searched for Amenemhat, for a sign of compassion, a glimmer of hope, but he was nowhere to be seen. He had vanished, swallowed by the mob, erased from her life as if he had never existed. The journey to the scar was arduous, a relentless test of endurance. The chariot bumped and swayed across the rough terrain. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the dust swirled around her, choking her and stinging her eyes. She was given little food or water, and her wounds festered in the heat. She arrived at the scar a broken woman, her body battered, her spirit crushed, her heart filled with bitterness and resentment. The outpost was a collection of dilapidated huts, huddled together like frightened animals against the vast expanse of the desert. They eyed her with suspicion and hostility, seeing her as an outsider, a threat to their fragile existence. She was assigned to a small, dilapidated hut, barely large enough to lie down in. The hut offered little protection from the elements, and it was infested with insects and rodents. Nefertari spent her days in a daze, wandering aimlessly through the settlement, trying to make sense of her new reality. She was forced to scavenge for food and water, competing with the other exiles for scarce resources. She was subjected to constant harassment and abuse, both verbal and physical. But amidst the despair, a flicker of defiance began to ignite within her. She refused to let her spirit be completely broken. She would survive, she would endure, and she would find a way to reclaim her life. She started by tending to her wounds, cleaning them with whatever meager supplies she could find. She learned to navigate the social dynamics of the settlement, identifying those who were trustworthy and avoiding those who were dangerous. She found a hidden spring, a source of fresh water that was unknown to the other exiles. She used this knowledge to her advantage, trading water for food and other necessities. She also found a small patch of fertile land where she began to cultivate vegetables. Slowly, she began to build a new life for herself. She made friends with a few of the other exiles, particularly an elderly woman named Isis, who had been banished for practicing forbidden magic. Isis became Nefertari's mentor, teaching her about the desert, about survival, and about the power of resilience. Isis told her stories of ancient goddesses, of women who had defied the gods and challenged the established order. She taught Nefertari about healing herbs, about the secrets of the stars, and about the importance of maintaining hope in the face of adversity. Nefertari listened intently, absorbing Isis's wisdom and drawing strength from her unwavering spirit. She realized that exile, while a form of punishment, could also be a form of liberation. She was free from the constraints of society, free from the expectations of men, and free to define her own destiny. She began to see the scars on her back not as symbols of shame, but as badges of honor, as testaments to her strength and resilience. She would not let Seti or anyone else define her. She would rise above her circumstances, and she would create a life that was worthy of her spirit. The whispers, though still present, began to fade, replaced by the quiet hum of determination, the steady rhythm of survival, and the nascent promise of a future forged in the heart of the desert. The sun, once a symbol of judgment, now felt like a source of warmth, a beacon of hope, illuminating her path towards redemption. She was scarred, yes, but she was not broken. And in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the scar, she had finally found her voice. Years passed in the scar, each season etching new lines on Nefertari's face, each sunrise hardening her resolve. She had become a leader among the exiles, a beacon of hope in a desolate land. Her knowledge of the desert, coupled with Isis's ancient wisdom, made her indispensable. She mediated disputes, healed the sick, and ensured the survival of the community. The scar, once a symbol of punishment, had become her sanctuary, a place where she was valued, respected, and loved. But the memory of her past, the injustice she had suffered, and the betrayal she had endured still burned within her.
She yearned for justice, not for revenge, but for accountability. She wanted Seti to be exposed for his lies and his treachery. She wanted Amenemhat to understand the depth of her pain. One day, a caravan arrived at the scar. It was a rare occurrence, and it brought with it news from the outside world. Nefertari learned that Thutmose IV had died, and his son, Amenhotep III, had ascended to the throne. The new pharaoh was known for his compassion and his commitment to justice. He had vowed to root out corruption and to reform the legal system. Nefertari saw this as an opportunity. She decided to write a letter to Amenhotep III, detailing her story and pleading for his intervention. She carefully crafted her words, laying bare the truth of her accusations, presenting irrefutable evidence of Seti's malice. She entrusted the letter to the caravan leader, a kind-hearted merchant who had shown her kindness in the past. She waited anxiously for a response, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. Weeks turned into months, and still no word came. She began to lose hope, to believe that her letter had been lost or ignored or intercepted by Seti himself. But then, one day, a royal envoy arrived at the scar. The envoy presented Nefertari with a scroll bearing the seal of Amenhotep III. The pharaoh had read her letter, and he was deeply disturbed by what he had learned. He had ordered a full investigation into her case, and he had summoned Seti to appear before him to answer her accusations. Nefertari was overjoyed. Justice was finally within her reach. She prepared to leave the scar, to return to Thebes, and to confront her accusers. As she bid farewell to her friends, she felt a pang of sadness at leaving the community she had built. But she knew that she had a greater purpose, to ensure that no other woman would suffer the same fate as she had. She arrived in Thebes a changed woman. The harshness of the desert had hardened her, but it had also strengthened her. She was no longer the naive handmaiden who had been seduced by the allure of courtly life. She was a survivor, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. The trial was even more public, even more spectacular than the first. A massive crowd gathered to witness the confrontation between Nefertari and Seti. Amenhotep III presided over the proceedings, his face stern, his eyes filled with righteous anger. Nefertari presented her case with eloquence and conviction. She recounted the events that had led to her downfall, exposing Seti's lies and his manipulations. She called witnesses, exiles from the scar, who had come to testify on her behalf. Seti, confident in his power and his influence, attempted to dismiss her accusations as the ravings of a bitter woman. But Amenhotep III was not swayed. He listened intently to the evidence, and he saw through Seti's deceit. Finally, the pharaoh delivered his verdict. Seti was found guilty of perjury, defamation, and abuse of power. He was stripped of his titles and his wealth, and he was sentenced to exile in the same desert outpost where Nefertari had suffered for so long. The crowd erupted in cheers. Justice had been served. Nefertari had been vindicated. As for Amenemhat, he approached Nefertari after the trial, his face etched with remorse. He apologized for his weakness, for his failure to stand by her side. He begged for her forgiveness. Nefertari looked at him, and she saw not the man she had once loved, but a broken, defeated figure. She realized that he had already suffered enough. She forgave him, not for his sake, but for her own. She needed to release the last vestiges of bitterness and resentment in order to fully embrace her new life. Amenhotep III offered Nefertari a position in his court, recognizing her intelligence and her leadership skills. She accepted, determined to use her influence to reform the legal system and to protect the rights of women. She dedicated her life to advocating for justice, to ensure that all individuals, regardless of their gender or their social status, would be treated fairly and with respect. She became a symbol of hope for the oppressed, a beacon of light in a world of darkness. Nefertari never forgot her time in the scar. She often returned to visit the community she had helped to build, bringing them supplies, offering them support, and reminding them that they were not forgotten. She lived a long and fulfilling life, leaving behind a legacy of courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice. Her story became a legend, passed down through generations, inspiring countless women to stand up for their rights and to challenge the established order. And so, the woman who had been condemned to a life of shame and exile became a symbol of hope and redemption. The scars on her back, once a mark of disgrace, became a testament to her strength and resilience. Nefertari had not only reclaimed her life, she had transformed it, proving that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can triumph over adversity, and that justice, though often delayed, can ultimately prevail. The whispers faded completely, replaced by the resounding echoes of her name, a name synonymous with courage, resilience, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. The sun, now, always, shone brightly upon her, a symbol of the enduring power of hope and the transformative potential of reclamation.